copy of a copy of a copy of a copy copy. Deja vu.
Deja Reviewed.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone because we're discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Mike.
I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 4, titled The 16mm Shrine.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
Suddenly up ahead,
just crossed. You're moving into another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Okay, so the 16mm Shrine was filmed in 1959, directed by Mitchell Lazen maybe, written by Rod Serling, starring Rod Serling, Ida Lupino, and Martin Balsam. And from IMDb, we got the description here. It's Barbara Jean Trenton is a fated film star who lives in the past by constantly rewatching her old movies instead of moving on with her life. So her associates try to lure her out of her self-imposed isolation. So, Mark, what did you think about this? I had seen this episode before. I've watched it a couple times in the past week, but you had never seen this episode before. Is that right?
That's correct.
And
I would like to
go. So before you even start, I want to give you some kudos for your guess from last week, because as our episodes, since you've never seen these episodes, we've been giving you the title of these episodes and seeing if you could guess what you thought what the episode was about. And since you are a film prof, you very quickly picked up on the fact that this was going to be just based on the 16mm Shrine being the name of it. You picked up that this was going to be some sort of film related deal, and you were spot on, and kudos to you for that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was nice that all that education paid off somewhere in terms of guessing Twilight Zone episodes.
On your free Twilight Zone podcast.
Subscribe now. Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of do the quick plot summary, and as usual, talk a little bit about where I thought it was going at various places. Although this one didn't have the same kind of twists and turns as some of the other episodes, it was pretty clear mostly where it was going from the get-go. So movie starts out, and I will say, flashing back to the prediction I had made, the very first shot of the episode, it was clear that it was a movie someone was watching just from the way it was shot, and they had kind of little gauze filter on, like the way they used to shoot the starlets. And so, like, from the first shot, I'm like, all right, I was right. It's something to do with somebody screening films. So it starts with a goodbye or kiss scene of some sort of like classic period romance movie. And then we see that it's in somebody's sort of home projection room, and there's a woman who turns out to be our central character, Barbara Jean Trenton, who is watching this, and she's watching this movie that stars her as a younger woman. And we get the intro voiceover from Rod Serling, which I got to give some kudos. We talked about this in the last episode as well. Some of these intros are just really like cleverly written and phrased, and like just a good use of words. Like, he thinks of language in an interesting way. So this one started out and it says, a picture of a woman looking at a picture, a movie grade of another time, once a brilliant star in a firmament, no longer a part of the sky. I'm like, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's poetic.
I love it.
Yeah, he's great at those.
Yeah, and then so he introduces Barbara Jean Trenton, whose world is a projection room, whose dreams are made out of celluloid. And I had to write that down because I'm just like, that is just great writing. You said poetic, and I think that really nails it. He's so good at these framings and giving you the information you need, but in this way that almost kind of sounds more profound than they actually are.
And with the underpinning of knowing what the Twilight Zone is, like knowing that it's going to be something weird or creepy, and it's this, and it's neat, flowery, poetic language. Like last week, or when we did Mr. Denton on Doomsday, when it starts off, there's three characters essentially to this play: Mr. Denton, this other guy, and then the gun. And it's like, oh man, something it gives you the chills a little bit. Something cool is about to happen.
Yeah, so she's watching. The voiceover continues, says she's been struck down by hit and run years and other great phrasing, looking for the license plate of what hit her. But so anyway, so she's the plot summary. She's this basically retired film star. We find out pretty early on that she was famous and was acting in these movies maybe 20 years ago, and now kind of just hangs out in this room watching her old movies. Her servant is worried about her, and she has this friend Danny, who we'll talk some more about later, but it's kind of unclear if he's a friend, former agent, or whatever. And he comes in and is trying to get her to go out of the house and such. So about 3 minutes in, which is we've sort of had the opening voiceover, established her sitting there watching these movies, and her servant comes in to leave her a snack, and then has this kind of interesting, like, backs out of the room watching Barbara Jean watching these movies like it's a horror movie. Although nothing like really scary has happened, other than when the servant comes in, Barbara Jean is kind of over like behind the projection screen, and she's kind of like mimicking the action of her younger self on screen, like she's kind of reacting it, which is a little weird, but like the servant kind of backs out, like, you know, she walked in and she's in there mutilating corpses or something, like, I'll just leave the tea here, and backs away.
And when she walks in, she actually gasps. Like she's like, or when she walks from behind the screen, her maid's like, and it's like, wait, what just happened?
Which I thought actually took a little bit of power away from later on. We'll get to when the servant comes back into the room and there actually is something to gasp at, and she does, but she's kind of like, well, you seem to gasp at everything, so I'm not sure if there's anything really going on here. So that was about 3 minutes in that the servant leaves, and at that point my guess was, clearly from the voiceover and from what we've seen, this woman is living in the past, and I thought either she was going to be looking for some sort of elixir to like bring back her youth, and maybe I was thinking a little bit of Mr. Denton on Doomsday and the peddler who gives a potion that does something, or somehow she was going to work her way into actually like living inside the film, which kudos to me for hitting that.
Yeah, that's quick.
Well, and I thought, and that's what I said, I thought this one had kind of less surprises. If this hadn't been a Twilight Zone, if you just started watching this, there's all sorts of interesting ways it could go, and I'm sure we'll talk about those later, and obviously the sort of Sunset Boulevard references. But knowing it's Twilight Zone, you're like, okay, so it's not just she has this nostalgia, like somehow there's going to be some weird supernaturally thing that happened, and the logical sort of in quotes there, but
logical to be absorbed into it.
Right. The logical thing was she was going to somehow be absorbed into the films. That was my guess 3 minutes in, and I never really changed from that.
Cool. Okay.
So her friend comes by, he's trying to get her to go out. They have this sort of repeated exchange where he's like, it's bright and sunny out. And she's like, thanks for the weather report, which she says every time. Maybe he's her agent because at some point, it's kind of midway through, there's not a lot of plot to this. She basically sits in there and watches these movies, and reminisces about the old days. Her friend gets her a meeting with a studio head at the studio
Saul.
She used to work for. Saul,
Of
yeah.
course his name is Saul.
Well, it had to be Saul when you were a movie studio head, I guess. He has a part for her, and so she's all excited and goes in, and the part is for a mother, and she sort of tells him off, like, I never played mothers, I'm never going to. She still clearly thinks of herself as the starlet romantic lead. And we can definitely talk a little bit about kind of how women are perceived on screen in the case of aging actresses and what happens with that. But she's all like, this is sort of pushed to an extreme. Like, she's clearly delusional about, like, she wants to play the like teen starlet.
Yeah.
She interestingly, they didn't cast a particularly old person. Like, she doesn't come off old. She's still attractive and still, looks like she still could be an actress, not necessarily playing the mother role, but she's also clearly not a teenager. And so she kind of tells off the studio head, and he tells her back off. And she goes home and kind of explains this idea that she's just going to recreate the 30s and live in it and kind of convince everyone else to go along with it. And that was the one place where I'm like, well, maybe this is going to go a different direction than I thought. And then it kind of turned out she was just like talking about a party, and her friend is like, well, these people you want to invite are dead or don't live here anymore. We haven't seen in 20 years or whatever. And so she kind of holds herself back up in her projection room. There's really only kind of one more plot beat before the end, which is her friend Danny gets one of her former leading men to come over, and she like gets all excited and goes and gets like dressed up and ready to meet him, and he's like, maybe this is what she'll need to kind of get her back into the world, is re-meet with one of these people that she still fantasizes about. And there was this really great moment, both in the writing and in her performance, when she went up to get ready because she had been sitting in her room watching movies for apparently days and not sleeping, and she's like, oh, I must look a fright or whatever. And so her friend Danny lets her former co-star in, and they're kind of waiting in the study, and she walks in and she sees him, and there's just a great facial performance from her.
Yes.
And before she even says anything, and then she kind of goes on to this bit about, it's funny, you always picture people the way you remember them. And of course, he's aged 20 plus years as well and doesn't look the way she remembered him. He's a middle-aged man now. He was probably older than her when they were acting together in the first place. But she sort of sees him, and you can read it in her eyes, like, I don't want to see this person who is also aged. I want the young guy to be back. I thought that was a great moment by Ida Lupino.
And she even says, I was essentially expecting you to look like you did 20 years ago. Not in that exact word. She's like, you're not who I was expecting, I think is her line. It's something like, I was expecting the man from the screen or whatever.
Yeah, and she has a picture of like one of his old movie star photos up on the wall, and kind of goes over like, this is the man I wanted to meet. And there's an interesting play there, because when she comes in, you think for a moment, and again, I appreciated the writing here and her performance, she's clearly taken aback, and then for a moment you sort of think she's going to be able to sort of play it off and be the polite host and like, oh yeah, I was startled because we always think of people how we saw them, and I haven't seen you in 20 years, and how are you now? And she kind of tries to do that, and then she's too far gone, and she goes over to the picture. She's like, this is the man I wanted to see. I don't know you. Get out of here.
Yeah, like, you're right. She's super rude about it. Like this poor, like, infirmed old man. No, not infirmed, but like this. I mean, he looked like he was in about his 60s. So you're probably he was probably Ida Lupino's or I forget her character's name. Age when
Barbara Jeans.
Yes, Barbara. He was probably Barbara's age when they shot the movie, so he's probably twice her age then, and he's 20 years older than her now, I would guess. So yeah. it was
great, but like you could have imagined them writing it where she sees him and is immediately like, who is this crazy?
Right.
Why like she tries to sort of be normal for a little bit and then just goes off on him.
And he is super kind to her and understanding. He's like, well, Barbara, he's like, it was 20 years ago. He's like, I've aged. And like, that's all in the past. He's like, he basically is the voice of reason other than Danny. And is essentially like, you gotta let it go. Like it's I'm not 20 years younger than I was. Than I am now.
No, he's super nice, and honestly, I mean, she's fortunate to have a lot of people sticking up for her, servants looking out for her. Danny, when she tells off Saul, the studio head, and Saul kind of says some pretty mean things to her, but it's in response to her saying some pretty nasty things to him, and they were kind of both like, I think both are equally into this battle, and Danny really sticks up for her after she's left. And I forget what the exact line is, but he's to Saul like, 20 years down the road when you're like on your hands and knees begging, I'm going to be there to stick my foot up your ass or something like that. Yeah. Like she has these people who really care for her and stick up for her. And this old friend, like who's in from business out of town, like comes by to see her and is super polite, even when she's being weird. Like she seems like she has a lot going for her. She lives in this nice house in Beverly Hills.
She has a sweet film room.
Yeah, so it's one of the things where it's interesting that like this isn't someone who's just like down on their luck now in a disaster, wishing for the better time. She still has what could be a very good life, and it's just anyway. We're probably getting more into commentary to finish up the summary. So she kicks them out. She kind of retreats into her projection room, and then there's a scene where the servant again comes in to bring her her snack or coffee, and goes in, gasps again, and drops the tray. We don't see what she's gasping at, but she's looking at the screen. At that point, I was like, well, clearly she's put herself into the movie. But we don't get to see that. The servant calls Danny over. Danny comes in, turns the projector back on and looks and see her on the screen and like talks to her. And there's actually kind of a nice little moment where he's like telling her to like come back, and she like hears him from inside the film, like kind of approaches the camera, and looks at him and waves, and then throws this handkerchief, and then retreats into the background of the film, and apparently is living in that world for the rest of her time. And then there's this final sort of coda scene where Danny walks back out into the hallway and finds that handkerchief on the ground, looking like where she had thrown it off the stairs, which looks like it's the same set.
Yes.
As her house is inside the film. It's that set as well. And so some sort of weird crossing over of the reality and fantasy there. And then we sort of hold on Danny, and he gives this, little smile that she's sort of moved on to this life where she's happier, I guess. So that's the plot summary.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So again, good job once again guessing right off the bat.
Well, I've had a couple of really bad guesses in a row, so I was due for one that kind of makes sense.
So I did want to I gave you your kudos. I wanted to give Barbara her kudos for a pretty badass theater room. Like she had like a little like curtained area around her screen, like, and as someone that built a little, low rent theater room with a projector in my basement, it was, she did a nice little job there. I'm sure she didn't do the construction herself like I did, but she did a nice job on her little theater room.
Yeah, and I was thinking like, man, you don't want the projector right next to you. That's noisy. You got to put that in a booth in the back. Well, but it is this nice visual where you can see the film rolling next to her, and she can kind of reach over and turn it on or off from her little easy chair. This is
before remote control. And I'm going to criticize Danny a little bit, because everyone was talking about like, Barbara, you're back in that room. It's all cobwebbed and dusty and dark. I'm like, I would spend all my time in a theater room. I basically do spend all my time in the theater room now anyhow.
Well, and I get where he's going with like, yeah, she needs to get out into the world, but I agree with you too. It's like, it's all dark. Let's open up the windows. Like, well, you can't watch a movie with the shades open. Like, close those up again. It did give them some opportunities for some pretty nice lighting and visuals. I thought this was one of the more interestingly shot of the Twilight Zone episodes we've seen thus far. They really enjoyed playing with the sort of flicker of the screen on people in this dark room. It was really cool. I want to quick mention, I thought she was really good. I did look her up, and there's kind of Ida Lupino, who played Barbara Jean. Her career a little bit paralleled the episode, in the sense of she started her career in the early 30s, kind of start of the sync sound film era. And then like 20 years later was kind of not acting in movies anymore. She had moved into TV cameo work. She was actually a villain in the 60s Batman show, which I thought was cool. Had a couple of appearances there. But according to IMDb, at least, she never really broke through as a star. So she was always kind of a secondary character, had like a couple of lead roles, but was not like a big star even when she was at the height of her career, was known for playing Hard Luck Dame. She was in High Sierra, which I think is probably, I like vaguely recognized her and couldn't place it. And that's probably what I knew her from. The other thing I thought was cool is she worked extensively as a TV director through much of the same period that she was acting in TV cameos. So the 50s and 60s was directing a lot of television.
Well, now that we are on the topic of Ida Lupino, I had to look her up when Saul tells her that she's going to play a mother, and he's like, oh, yeah, but it's like a 40-ish mother, but she's very young at heart. So Ida Lupino in 1959 was 41. So I liked the. I mean, that was probably hit a little close to home for her. That she was. This was the role. Like, you're playing a faded TV or film star. That's kind of what you are now.
Yeah, and that is sort of the classic issue with with casting, and particularly with actresses, is a lot of actresses who are gonna be big stars. A lot of them tend to sort of break through and have their big roles earlier than male actors do often. Sure. You even have sometimes they sort of breakthrough role as a kid, and they get these roles in like their teens, 20s, maybe into their 30s, and sort of hit 40, and now it's like they're over the hill, and yet meanwhile they're being cast along male actors who are 60, 70, like playing the romantic lead, and like that's been an ongoing issue in Hollywood. And so I kind of gave it I don't know if it was intended for that sort of social awareness aspect of it, but I give the episode some props for playing with that. And I thought when her former co-star showed up and was notably older than her, that was a little sort of jab at that.
Yeah. I also would like to point out, since we have, I guess it's more me that has the morbid obsession of looking up whether these actors are dead, that Danny, at one point when she's talking about throwing the party, inviting all these people, and Danny's like, well, he's been dead for 4 years. I'm like, oh, see? Everyone's thinking about how all these old actors are now dead.
Well, it's pretty relevant in this particular case. Yes. Where it's about people aging, moving on. Danny, by the way, played by Martin Balsam, who, as soon as I saw him, like, oh my God, it's Arbogast from Psycho. The classic Hitchcock film. And he's the detective who goes to investigate. And
he
spoiler
looked
alert for Psycho, also 60 years old now, or almost. That came out in 1960, 59 years old this year. Has the famous sort of like he is like falling backwards down the stairs with the camera kind of going with him on his face. But I totally recognized him from that. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And then I'm like, this would have been like right around, like he might have gone, for all I know, like Psycho was the next thing he shot after this, because that would have been in production in 59 or 60.
I would also like to just bring up the fact that Jerry, her former co-star, if they were trying to make him look aged or nerdy, he had some of the most ridiculous glasses I've ever seen in my life. Like, the middle of his glasses were like Coke bottled and like super thick, and then it had like rims around the outside, and I couldn't tell if it was thicker or thinner. But like when he turns around with it, like the big reveal that he's a lot older than she was expecting, and he's got this terrible little mustache that probably looked great. It was very Clark Gable-esque, but on an old guy it doesn't look that good. But he turns around and he's got these like just bugging out eyes because of his crazy, crazy glasses. So I was laughing.
Maybe he still did look really good and they needed to make him look older, so they put the glasses on.
Could be.
I'm thinking of like, the classic sort of teen movie, like a She's All That or something, and like, oh, she's ugly, and they take the glasses off and like, now she's beautiful.
Yeah. Before I forget, when you were talking about the Hollywood, basically women are good from like 18 to about 28, then we forget about them. So this character, Barbara in particular, or Ida Lupino, I guess the actual actress, needed to wait till she was about 60 so she could take the role of the maid and then come back as that, because in between then she was no good. She was just used up by Hollywood.
Yeah, and so I think it's worth saying, like, that is a huge problem and something that Hollywood is still dealing with. I think the show did try to sidestep that a little bit by making her so oblivious to, like, she could have very easily said, like, why can't I be a lead or something, like, not that I refuse to play mothers. And she was just like so oblivious to the fact that time had passed. And she's like, I want to be the teenage actress as the romantic lead in this film where I'm playing the ingenue. Like, she was not going to move past like what she could have done at 18.
Yeah.
And so that allowed it to kind of stay focused on their plot, and the Twilight Zone, rather than kind of getting into the politics of this elderly studio executive, telling her she's too old to play that part and needs to play the mother.
Well, and she hilariously burned her bridge with that studio. I mean, she did not she wasn't like, oh, I feel like I'm still young and shouldn't be playing these roles. She's like, fuck you and fuck this place. And so and when you were asking during your summary about Danny's and her relationship, because I couldn't tell, kind of like we did with Mr. Denton on Doomsday and the woman who worked in the tavern, we didn't really know what their relationship was. This is kind of the same way. I felt like there could have been a romantic relationship. There was definitely at least some sort of professional relationship, because it seemed like it was Danny and Saul. It felt like Saul was doing Danny a huge favor to essentially give her this offer only part of mother, and she kind of spat in his face. And I think Danny, while defending her, was still trying to do some damage control with Saul. He should have been, as he walked out, he should have been like, look, here's my card. I've got someone that will definitely play this. He's like, call me later on. But
I don't think Danny did any. I think Danny damaged things further, which is what I kind of appreciate. Like, he was really sticking up for her, even though she was being pretty unreasonable about things. Even when she first walks in, before she hears about the part, she's like, I have all my specific demands, and like, you haven't acted in 20 years and they're giving you
that is true. And another thing about when you were talking about the maid coming in shocked and then she comes in shocked, there's a lot of gasping, like exaggerated gasping in the Twilight Zone. And so I was a little surprised that her reaction the second time was so great, because, and I guess it was, so we don't actually see what the maid sees on screen when she gasps the second time when Barbara's on screen.
Right.
And I guess if it is a shot of their house with current Barbara on film, but if I walked in as that maid and there was no one in the room and there was something on screen, I'd be like, when the fuck did she shoot this movie in our house? Like, where she looks relatively recent. My first reaction wouldn't be like, she's been sucked into the screen. It would be like, when the hell did you have time to shoot this movie? You've been sulking for the past, year or whatever. Instead
That's
of
fair.
The immediate reaction of something supernatural is happening. And then I'll also call this maid to task, because if I did think she was trapped in that screen, I certainly wouldn't have turned off the projector immediately like she does. Like, I don't know what the rules are in that world. Could that have killed her? Would that have killed all those people on screen?
I don't know. Although I was thinking that, but then I was also thinking but the film will run out. Like, maybe she was trying to keep her alive by stop. Like, if the film ends, then she
Good point.
dies. I don't know. Yeah, that is an interesting question of when did she shoot this movie? And I think that is another sort of Sunset Boulevard-y sort of thing, where that ends with the for those who aren't familiar with that movie, that's a sort of classic film. Very much in this, if this wasn't the Twilight Zone, from the first scene, I would have guessed that was the direction it was going, with the sort of former starlet who, in this case now, is much more elderly. And sort of holed up in her house, reliving her fame and imagining she'll be famous again. And the end of that movie, famously, the line is, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeVille," but she comes down and the police are there to arrest her for killing somebody, which she did. But she's so delusional at that point. She sees the news cameras and the people, and she thinks that they're shooting the movie she's been wanting to make her comeback in her house, and that's where she sort of comes down and mugs for the camera and such. And so I thought the idea of this scene that we see her in is actually in her house, specifically her coming down the stairwell, was a pretty direct reference to that.
Cool. And then I just kind of have one more thought, and then we can take a break and because we're running on time. But once again, I feel like in the Twilight Zone, there's a little bit of an afterlife allegory. Not that it's, I mean, I don't think it's clear if they were intending that Barbara's dead and now has been transported into that film. But if she were, or if that's, she's going to live indefinitely in this world, that was essentially her heaven. She froze that time in that film and now can live out the rest of her days, like you mentioned, in that film.
Yeah, and I think they were very this episode could have ended when Danny sort of she's on the film and the film rolls out, and you're just sort of left wondering about that. And instead they intentionally sort of add this coda scene where he finds the handkerchief and then we hold on his face and he gets this smile. And I think we're meant to think like this is her heaven. She's going to be happy and sort of stay in that world. And that's a good thing.
And how do Danny and the maid explain this to the police?
Oh, they're going to jail.
Do you have any other thoughts, Mark, or should we take a break?
Just one other thing I thought I'd throw out that I thought was a nice little touch and kind of played like I mentioned, she is not an elderly woman in this, and seemed like somebody who certainly could still be an actress. But one of the things where I thought they played up sort of her disconnect with the times and sounding like an old person was when she's going on this rant about how the movies have changed. She's like, now they make these movies without any sentiment and men in their undershirts and there's jukeboxes and rock and roll. And you really wanted her to just say, and get off my lawn, you know? It was this great sort of like, this would have been like, 50s were kind of early in the, what we would think of as the rock and roll era. And she's like, clearly like having none of this, like, I want it to be the 30s, like not just my career, but like I want everything to be the 30s again.
Thank you for not saying that she's as a fellow 41-year-old. Thank you for saying that she's not an elderly woman and she still could be an actress and be attractive.
Mike, you could still be an actress and attractive.
Thank you.
41.
Thank you. Okay, is that you're good? Should we take a break?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, we'll be right back after the break. All right, we're back. And as you guys know, we like to rate these Twilight Zone episodes on a sweat scale. on a scale of, because when I was talking to Mark about this, I was noticing how sweaty these characters in a lot of these episodes are. So we have a 10-point scale on how sweaty the characters in these episodes are.
I'm going to go ahead and just say this was like a 1. Like even the fact that she's like holed up in this room where they never open the blinds or doors and there's a projector running. And I can tell you projector bulbs get super hot.
Yes.
And she's sitting right next to it. Even where she should be sweaty, she was not. They kept the sweat off of everyone in this episode.
This is definitely a 1, assuming that 0 is not our lowest. Let's say 1 to 10. So this is definitely a 1 because even Saul, the studio executive, who you would picture as a big, sweaty, fat guy, was not even particularly sweaty. I did not notice sweat, so that's good. We're just gonna call that a 1 and move on.
All right.
So now we like to talk about how this episode can be applicable in modern times.
Yeah, and I think we hit a little bit of this talking about some of the ageism in casting and such already.
For sure. Yeah, so I hate to bring up social media influencers, but I'm going to. There's a Netflix documentary that I frankly don't recommend watching, but it's called American Meme. And they have like interviews with Paris Hilton and Brittany Furlan, who I'd never heard of, but she's apparently was a big Vine person. And then the Fat Jewish, who I only know about because he's a joke-stealing fucking piece of shit hack. And there's some guy that like took a bunch of, there was like a big photo guy that would like photograph all these crazy parties. And they're just exploring those people and like what happens, first of all, how crazy it is for them. Even Emily Ratajkowski or whatever appears in this and talking about like how like I need to be producing these things and I need to be like constantly putting out content, and there's all this pressure on me as a social media influencer. And like it was interesting. I don't really recommend it, but it was interesting seeing Paris Hilton be kind of like the veteran of that scene. I mean, which she kind of was. She was really the voice of reason. And there was a lot, like the one guy that was a big partier and like taking a bunch of pictures of girls flashing their boobs, was talking about like waking up, like throwing up blood and all this stuff. I'm like, Jesus Christ, the amount of pressure that's put on them. But then they were also talking about like how these people almost can't transition into just a normal life because like that social media has become their life and that personality and the spotlight has become their life. And I think that was kind of Barbara's thing. She was more frozen in time, but like it was when the cameras stop running and no one's interested in you anymore. It's like, what are you? Like, who are you as a person?
Yeah, that is a interesting sort of feature of modern life, and as you mentioned, I think we sort of always had that. You know, you've had the person who they're famous in front of the camera, and what happens when it's off. The idea of the social media influencer, these people who really are famous, kind of for being famous, as has famously been said, to overuse a word, is I don't want to say that's an entirely new phenomenon, but the way that some of the social media people work, that's at least a new niche to this. And I've heard the same thing, that, you know, some of these people, if that's how they're making their living, definitely first world problem sort of thing, but they're working really hard at it. You know, we took 8 hours to set up this one Instagram photo to look perfect and staged the right way to match our brand and get out there, and that's how we do our thing. You know, it's interesting you mentioned Paris Hilton as the sort of veteran and voice of reason. Even though that is kind of her milieu, that's also, it's easy to be the voice of reason when, if you stop publishing anything and aren't making any money from your appearance, all you have to fall back on is the entire Hilton family fortune, as opposed to somebody who is making their living doing this. So I think that's super relevant. The thing that jumped out to me about the modern relevance of this, if I can move us in a little different direction for a second,
Sure.
Is it's kind of symptomatic of this thing you see from the very beginning of cinema and continuing into today, of this idea of people kind of being sucked into or taken over by whatever the technology is of the time, and this fear of that. And I don't think she was not afraid of ending up inside the film. That as we said, that kind of ended up as a good thing for her. But you see this with every new technology, where there's films and television shows that come out where somehow somebody ends up trapped inside the radio, inside the television, inside the film, inside the cell phone, with whatever the sort of technology of the time is. And that's just this ongoing trope. I was thinking in the more current era, in terms of our newest technology, in that sense being like the internet, and you have movies like The Matrix or Lawnmower Man, about people who literally are sort of living inside these technologies, and generally that's viewed as a bad thing. The twist in this case was that it's a good thing that she ends up inside the film. But I just thought that was really interesting, how many places you keep seeing that trope come up, and that was foreshadowed so much in here with a lot of the lines about that she just wants to live inside the celluloid and blah, 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 blah. But it's, I don't know, that was what struck me.
And to take that into the reality, like, because for sure it's a very popular fictionalized thing, but there is literally a diagnosed syndrome from your neck being craned over because looking at your cell phone, like that is a new thing. I mean, even going back, to the 60s and 70s, carpal tunnel syndrome from typing.
Right.
There are new diseases but new syndromes that we have because of getting obsessed with technology, and they're repetitive. People are getting repetitive stress injury from their thumbs, from swiping on their phones and using their thumbs in a way that their thumbs have never been used to being used. So I think that that's a great point.
The thing about the heads being craned over looking at your phones, I don't know if you saw that the first time I encountered the information on that was a super sensationalist headline about like kids growing horns thanks to social media. And what it turned out that was super misleading, not entirely inaccurate, because what they were finding is actually kids were starting to grow these tiny little bone spurs on the back of their skull. So it's not like horns sticking out of the top of your head, but literally these projections on your skull that didn't used to be there, that are from the neck being craned over, and the way that the muscles are attaching to the bone to sort of support that was growing these new spurs on the bone.
It's a good thing kids these days have tiny little pea brains, so their heads aren't as heavy as our big-brained heads are.
I want to throw out one other thing about this that I thought was super relevant, and really struck me in the current political and media era, was the relevance to today. What she really wanted to do was kind of, and she explicitly says it to Danny, was create her own little inside this house. It's going to be the 1930s, and and everyone's just going to have to deal with that. Like, I don't want to interact with the outside world or be told that that's not true or anything. And now we're in this era with social media being a big part of it, and fragmentation of media in terms of we're all watching, different things. Like, someone gets their news from MSNBC, someone else gets their news from Fox News, and they are getting entirely different pictures of the world.
Yeah.
And there's this idea where everyone can kind of create their own reality or bubble. And what's different, I think, than had been in the past, and where I thought this was really prescient, was at this point you can kind of do that and never experience anything outside it. You don't have a Danny to come in and tell you it's not true. Or even if you do, you have 40 other people saying, like, no, don't listen to Danny. Our bubble is correct. And I think that's, if you look at it from the perspective of, we can all look at her and say, like, she's crazy. She's a nut job who, like, wants to live in the 20 years ago. I think there are a lot of people today who would watch this episode and say she's crazy and not realize they're very much doing the same thing.
That's a perfect segue into another point that I thought of, the very personal relevance of modern relevance of this. I just saw an audition a couple weeks back for a role of a 35 to 45-year-old man that was a daddy, in fact. So and so I auditioned for it, and I got the part. And
congratulations.
Thank you. But I was like, that's perfect. That's right in my wheelhouse. I literally am between those two ages. So, but I can personally feel for this lady. I'm like, well, I guess I'm never playing the high school jock anymore. Or like I guess that's my roles now. So, and then also, like, kind of like when we discussed when we were talking about One for the Angels, there's something to be said for that idea of moving on and making room for the next generation. Kind of like her co-star Jerry was like, look, we're not those people anymore. Like, we have to transition or move on, and we can't be living in the past. And I think that was a theme that we've seen in episodes prior.
Yeah, and he had found a way to move on and be productive. He now owns a string of supermarkets outside Chicago, which he's probably making good money, making a good honest living and providing a service to people. But it sort of realized, at least for him, that his time in the acting world was done and moved on, and he was okay with that. And kind of, they don't explicitly say this, but you kind of got the sense he was like grateful, like, hey, I got to have some fun doing that. That was cool. I'm glad I was in these movies. And instead of being, pissed off that he wasn't that anymore, sort of appreciated that as a period in his life and now something different. I will say as a parent, this will be good fodder for your acting role as a dad. I very much get that. Like, kids go through stages so quick, particularly when they're little. I mean, when they're very little, from, one age to 2 months later, their behavior is totally different, and what they're doing is very different. Everything's a phase, but the phases are very short. And usually in every stage, there's like aspects of it where you're like, wow, this is really cool, and aspects where you're like, I can't wait till they're older.
Yeah.
But then when you look back on them, it's sometimes very easy to romanticize the, like, you see a little baby and like, oh, it's so cute, man. I loved it when our kids are baby. And then you kind of think back, you're like, no, I was like exhausted all the time. And and you remember the positive aspects and not the negative. But I felt like he had a healthy attitude towards the acting career, where it was like, I'm sure there were stressful days on set and negative things and parts where it was very hard work, but sort of look back and like, yeah, there were these positive experiences, and I'm going to remember those as sort of like that phase, but I don't want to be in that phase anymore. That's not who I was. That's not who I am. That's who I was. And she kind of wants to go back to who she was.
And going back a little bit to my other thing too, because now I'm saying it out loud, I wonder if Rod Serling was going through a little bit of a midlife crisis when he wrote these, because Mr. Denton on Doomsday also kind of had a, hey, it's the end of your career, move on and let the young gunslingers come and take over. Like, that's
been the theme in 3 of our 4 episodes.
Yeah,
so
3
far.
of the 4 episodes, really.
Yeah.
And so yeah, maybe Rod was just going through some shit that he was figuring out.
All right.
Yeah. So should we rate this one, Mark?
Yeah.
And this is out of 5 stars, remember?
Yeah. Well, because we needed more variation on the sweatiness scale than on the ratings. I would give this a 4. I thought it was really well acted. It was well written. It's like, I was really excited to talk about this episode. There's so much that like really holds up and feels very relevant. It doesn't feel dated in terms of the themes and stuff like that. The only reason I wouldn't give it a 5-star is I thought it was pretty predictable from the beginning where it was going. And this was another one that kind of feels stretched at some places where it's like, okay, we got that beat, and they just sort of keep hammering on things to sort of, it felt like this really needed to be maybe like a 20-minute episode. Instead, it's like 24.
I'm glad you said.
So I still
4
enjoyed
because,
it, but
yeah, I'm glad you said 4 because this actually was, if you're looking at IMDb's rating, this was actually one of the lower rated ones, I think, from the ones that we've watched so far. And I was a little surprised by that because maybe it's because this hit a little bit closer to home and I was feeling this lady's pain a little bit more. But I would also give it a 4. I think it was a neat episode, and frankly it was pretty creepy. Like it was a very and not even the Twilight Zone-y part of it where she literally gets sucked up into it, but just the idea of getting sucked up in that very isolated existence and that very like living in the, I mean, I just had a reunion with a bunch of buddies because our 20-year college reunion's coming up. And I was like, shit, like this reminds me so, and we're telling jokes from when we were in college and we're telling stories about how we were in college. I'm like, this is great. This is neat. I'm glad this is only 3 days with these guys who I love very much if you're listening. But I was like, I need to get back to the shit that I've got going on. Like my own stuff. I need to be 41-year-old Michael Brott. I can't revert back to 21-year-old Michael Brott.
Yeah, and there's a difference between appreciating the sort of past and like you got together with those guys for a weekend and like, hey, let's remember some of those fun things we did and tell some of those old jokes, and that's enjoyable and I think a positive. But you're also not like wallowing it and staying there forever.
No, I kept bringing out a picture and I'm like, I was expecting these guys, not you old fat fuckers. And they all had these really thick Coke bottle glasses.
It's interesting you mentioned that the rating was low. And I wonder if you think about who's rating these on IMDb, the person who's going to take the time to go rate an episode of The Twilight Zone is probably somebody who's a huge Twilight Zone fan. And yeah. I will say I like this more as a sort of standalone episode, and character study is really fascinating. I think the lead performance by Lupino is fantastic. But it's not what we think of as the Twilight Zone where there's just weird stuff happening. I mean, like this very well, if you could have changed the last 5 minutes of this and just like they come in and she's like there talking to the screen and has had a mental breakdown instead of her being sucked in, and it would have worked just as well.
True.
It just wouldn't have fit Twilight Zone. So I wonder if for some people who are big Twilight Zone fans, maybe they rated this a little bit lower just because it's not what they are looking for out of the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, Mark, are you ready to move on to guessing what next episode is going to be about?
I am. I'm guessing it'll be episode 5.
This will be episode 5, and this is going to be a tricky one because you did really well on this last guess. But the episode that we're going to be watching this coming week is called Walking Distance. Walking Distance. What do you think that's going to be about?
All right. Well, I feel nowhere near as confident as I did last week in this. But I got to throw out a guess. I'm going to say it's something with somebody who is trying to get to somewhere via walking and somehow can never reach it. Like it keeps getting further away, or he's walking and not progressing, or something like that.
Okay. So if you want to watch that episode, it's on the US Netflix, and see how far off or how far on Mark is with his guess.
Probably off.
Thank you guys so much for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. Next week's episode, like we said, is episode 5, season 1 of The Twilight Zone, Walking Distance. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us. And if you want to check us out, you can find us at dejareview.com. That's where our social media stuff lives.
Or at Deja Reviewed on Twitter or Instagram as well.
Thank you. Hope you guys tune in next week. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mike.
Deja Reviewed.
Deja vu.